Welcome back to another episode of the Pursuit Zone Adventure Travel Podcast. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and I interview modern-day explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 156 with Faye Shepherd. Faye talks about her 6-month cycling adventure through the South American Andes, starting in La Paz, Bolivia with her teammate Anna McNuff. Anna McNuff has appeared twice before on the podcast, and if you want to listen to those episodes, you'll find them in episode number 40 and episode number 97. If you want to get in touch, you can send me an email at paul@thepursuitzone.com or leave me a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. And now, let me introduce my guest. In October 2016, Faye Shepherd began a 6-month, 5,500-mile cycling adventure through Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Starting in La Paz with her teammate Anna McNuff, the two cycled to Ushuaia on a mostly off-road route through the Andes. With over 100,000 meters of elevation gain, they cycled the equivalent height of Mount Everest over 10 times, while wild camping most of the journey. As Faye writes in her blog, "I thought these facts and figures were going to be the most important in terms of a sense of accomplishment, but they're not. In fact, they seem wholly inconsequential against a backdrop of extraordinary experiences and memories that we have been fortunate enough to be able to create." You can learn more about Faye and her adventures at fayeshepherd.wordpress.com. Faye Shepherd, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks very much for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much.
Good stuff. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you here.
Oh,
what was it that kind of sparked the whole idea for this adventure?
It actually started in 2015. I just cycled the length of New Zealand, inspired by this girl called Anna McNuff, who was spending 6 months running the length of New Zealand solo and unsupported. And when I heard that she was running the length of New Zealand, I was like, wow, I was super inspired. I thought, how can a girl, go out there on her own, not know the country, and just go out there and run the length of it on this gnarly trail. And funnily enough, I was out there at the same time as Anna for a friend's wedding. And so instead of going out for a friend's wedding, just for the wedding and then come home, I decided to try and cycle the length of New Zealand, knowing that I wasn't particularly good at running, but I could ride a bike all right. So I borrowed all the kit to go and cycle New Zealand. I borrowed the tent, the stove, the bike, literally everything I borrowed. And I flew out to New Zealand and started pedaling at the bottom and made my way up to the top. It took me about 5 weeks. But along the way, I bumped into Anna. Well, I tracked Anna down, actually, using her tracker. I took social media stalking to a whole new level. And I saw her emerging from this bushy area of New Zealand, and I cycled up to her and said, "Anna McNuff," and she didn't really have any idea who I was. But I shouted her a night in the hostel that night, and we watched a terrible film and bonded over a great big tub of ice cream, and we got on really well. And it was after that, really, when we both had returned home back to England, like a few months later, I had a message from Anna saying, "Faye, do you fancy scooting the length of South America?" And I was like, "What, on like mopeds?" She was like, no, on push scooters. I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. Like, I was up for it. I was at a point in my life when I had all this time free, and I wanted to do something with it. Unfortunately, Anna came along with this wicked idea, and so that was the beginning of it all, really.
I wonder, not to knock on the scooter manufacturers, but it just seems crazy that somebody would want to use scooters to go on a long journey through, less than flat terrain with something like that. What was your experience with those?
So it is totally bonkers. The idea alone is bonkers, and that's what we love. We love that it was different. We thought that if we turned up to a remote village in Peru, that kids would love to come out and have a go, and it would be a great way of engaging with locals. So we really ran with the idea, and we met with a local a British scooter manufacturing company who loaned us these scooters to go and try them out and see if it would work and if it was feasible. So we went to an area in Wales, which is supposed to mimic the Andes. But to be honest, I'm not sure anywhere can mimic the Andes apart from the Andes because it's so out there. But anyway, we went to this really hilly area of England and, well, Wales. And we spent the weekend bombing around the countryside on these scooters. And while it was like tremendous fun going downhill, it was the best feeling. Going uphill, as you can imagine, we pretty much had to push the entire time. And so we looked at the bigger picture and thought, well, actually, it's probably a little bit too bonkers on that side of things. So we just decided instead of scooting the length of South America, we would try and cycle over the Andes and go over as many of the high altitude mountain passes as possible. I love the altitude. I've been up Kilimanjaro, my first taste of the altitude, and Anna hadn't done anything at altitude, so it was great for her to experience something completely different. So after testing the scooters and deciding it wasn't quite right, we still wanted something pretty gnarly, and we thought that cycling over the Andes as many times as we could would do the trick.
Let me ask you about Kilimanjaro for a second. I get the sense from talking to people about it that it's pretty intense experience. What was it like for you?
It absolutely is. It was my first big adventure, really. And it's a good one to do because it's all organised by whoever you go with. Normally people go on and have a big travel package. And that's exactly what I did. So I didn't have to worry about accommodation or the camping and tents. It was all set up by porters, which for a first big adventure was perfect because I hadn't even ever camped before, let alone gone up a mountain. So it was great in that sense, and it is intense. I mean, you really bond with the people that you're there with, and that in itself is something that I've absolutely loved about adventures, that you meet people that you share an experience with that you can't share that same experience with anybody else because you had to be there in that moment. So for me, that was really special, and that's when I first learned about pushing yourself beyond what you ever thought you were capable of. And it wasn't just me on that adventure. It was loads of people pushed beyond what they thought they were capable of. And that, for me, was really, truly special. And I thought, I've got to do more of this. And so then, obviously, I went on to the New Zealand trip and then the Andes. What
are you doing, or what do you do to earn a living? And the part two of that question would be, how do you manage to take the time off from that?
So at the time, I was a farm animal health consultant for a local agricultural college. So I would go out to farms and look at basically cows and how lame they were and talk to the farmer about how they could improve things on their farm to reduce lameness. But the college I worked for were quite flexible, and they allowed me to have, a holiday to go and do Kilimanjaro because that was only like a couple of weeks off. I took 3 months off to do New Zealand, and they let me have a sabbatical for that. So I just literally went up to them and asked. And I think if you don't ask, you don't get. So, and then fortunately, well, or unfortunately, it depends how you look at it. The UK voted to leave the European Union, and I was actually paid with European Union money. So that was how we were paid, and that was how we were employed. So I lost my job. I was made redundant. And so with this newly found time off and a redundancy package, fortunately I had enough money to go and do the Andes, so that's what I did.
How long did it take you and Anna to plan this adventure?
I think it was like a period of about 8 months from the initial idea, to actually flying out to La Paz. But actually we spent like one day in a cafe looking at routes and mountains and marking all the highest mountains on the map, and then settling on the fact that we weren't going to do the whole of the Andes. We were just going to do the highest high altitude section of the Andes that we could, just because we wouldn't have enough time. We gave ourselves sort of 6 months to do what we wanted to do. So yeah, in terms of planning, I think we had one day together in a cafe looking at maps, a few emails here and there, but really we flew out there and planned maybe like a couple of weeks worth of routes ahead. Then we'd get to the next stop and then look at where we were going to go from there, but just with a rough idea of how where we wanted to go. And then when we were out there, we planned in more detail how we were going to achieve that. So that was good. And there was a really good website called Andes by Bike by these people, the Pikes on bikes. So they'd cycled a lot of the Andes before, and so that was a great resource for us to sort of look up various routes and things to see along the way. But much of the places we've been, they're not cycled. People don't cycle them because there's nobody there. There's no villages, there's no towns, and that's what we loved. So it was finding, the remotest routes possible, really. We loved it.
How far out of La Paz did you go to get to the starting point? Was that an ordeal or pretty easy?
We started in La Paz, really. We flew in and then we spent a week there acclimatizing because it's super high. I think it's 3,600 meters above sea level. So you start off and you're already exhausted and not used to the altitude. And we didn't have any appetite. And both Anna and I, we eat. We're both tall girls. I'm 6'1". Anna's, I think, probably about 5'11". So we're tall girls. We've got a healthy appetite. But when we flew into La Paz and we couldn't even eat, a burrito in a day, that's when we're like, oh, this acclimatizing could take a bit longer than we thought. So we stayed there for a week, acclimatized, did a couple of our acclimatization rides up to higher altitudes. But then we really just set off from there, and we sort of went north into the Yungas region, and that's when the cycle began, really.
Yeah, one of the things that always scares me is cycling in traffic. How was it cycling in La Paz?
Do you know what? I'm the same, because I come from a very rural part of Britain. It's really quiet here, and to go from that to cycling in La Paz, I mean, I've never even cycled in a city before. I've never cycled in a city, London, let alone La Paz. And it was just bonkers, absolutely bonkers. And we couldn't wait to get out of there, to be honest. I mean, it was quite an experience, but you've got like fumes and dusts and smell and dancing zebras, like people in zebra costumes helping people cross the street. So it is an absolutely insane place to go. I mean, it's very vibrant, but yeah, the traffic is chaos, and you really have to look out for one another. So it was good that both Anna and I were there. We were all in our high vis and we got out there alive, which is good. So
let's talk a little bit about the bike that you put together in your kit. I'm going to assume you did not have the same borrowed stuff that you took to New Zealand? No.
I approached a local bike company called Cranked Bikes. I went there with an idea, which was I wanted a touring bike, just like I had for the Andes, but beefed up a bit. Not the Andes, sorry, the New Zealand, but beefed up a little bit. And I left them with that idea, and I came back to them, and they were like, "No, we've got a completely new idea, and that's to literally build the bike from the ground up, because what you're going to do to the bike is going to be pretty intense. You're going to be off-road. It needs to be super robust, and it needs to manage with the terrain. Like the terrain we're going to be on, it's not going to be roads a lot of the time. It's going to be sand. It's going to be boulders and rocks and things. So we went with a steel frame so that if there were any cracks or anything, it could be welded back up. I had big 29-inch wheels, 2.5-inch wide tyres, which were tubeless. So if I ran over a cactus thorn, which I did quite regularly, it wouldn't puncture my tyre because there was sealant in there that would self-seal it. I had a dynamo hub, which generated electricity so that we could charge our phones and GPS devices and that sort of thing. It could also carry a lot of water on the frame. So we had 5 cages where you could put mount bottles on the actual bike, which was fantastic because the distance between water stops was pretty big at times. And then we decided to go for quite a light setup. So we just had a couple of panniers on the back and a handlebar bag, because we knew we'd be pushing up some mountains and at altitude. And obviously, the lighter you are, the easier that's going to be. So that was pretty much it. Yeah, it was a custom built bike. And Cranked Bikes did a fantastic job with that one.
Did you get any sponsorship help with that?
I did. So Cranked helped me out a lot with that. So I paid partially for the bike, and they helped me out. We also had Crew Room, which is a clothing company over here. They helped us out with some clothes. The tent, which was, a hugely important part of the trip for us. We decided to take a tent each, just because when you've spent all day with somebody, just to have that space in the evening is really important, I think. So we decided to take a tent each, and Ellis Brigham helped us out with that one. So we were fortunate enough to have some sponsorship. But in terms of flights and actually financing it, it was all from our own pockets. So good old redundancy money there helped out.
Did you find that it was difficult to get these sponsorships? I'm wondering how much time you spent trying to get those.
Yeah, so I mean, there were people that, the companies I approached that turned me down, and they weren't interested. You can spend a lot of time attempting to find sponsorship, but fortunately, the companies that we did work with, I mean, Anna had a relationship with Crew Room and Ellis Brigham already, and my relationship with Cranked was a new one, and they just turned out to be really nice people, and they wanted to get in on this really cool adventure. And then after that, I didn't really pursue sponsorship anymore because, it was great that we had it, but for me, I didn't want it to be about promoting other businesses. I wanted it to be about the adventure and the relationship that Anna and I, had over that trip. So that was the deal with sponsorship.
Were you using a derailleur setup?
Yes. Yeah. So I had a couple. So I had two rings on the front and 10 on the back, and I had an Ultegra shifter setup. So I was on dropped handlebars. Anna had a very different setup to me. I mean, she had a derailleur setup as well, but it was a very different bike. It had smaller tyres. It had 26-inch wheels. It had tubed tyres, her bike, which we found to be not the best on that sort of terrain. I think Anna had about 19 punctures for the trip, which was, it was fine. It was just when you get, I remember on one particular day we had 3 punctures in a day, and then you're on your last tube, and we're like, oh, if this one goes, then we're in some serious trouble. We'd have to walk a long way, and we didn't know if we had enough supplies and that sort of thing. I mean, we would have made it work, but it's things like that's where we really learned the benefits of each other's bikes. So it was interesting from that perspective as well.
How many flats did you get?
When I was on the tubeless tyres, I had no flats, and that was in about 5,000 miles. So I had absolutely no flats because they self-sealed. But my rear rim, broke when we were on the Carretera Austral, which is only about 500 miles from the finish. So I had to replace the wheel. So I replaced the wheel, but I couldn't get a tubeless setup. So I replaced it with a tube setup, and in that 500 miles, I got a puncture in that tube. So technically, I had one puncture in 5,500 miles. But if only my wheel would have lasted that last 500 miles, I'm sure there would have been none.
Yeah, that's good data. That's good to know that there's such a discrepancy between the two setups. Because in my mind, I'm always thinking, the tubes must be better because you've got all that extra rubber inside there to protect everything. But apparently not. Yeah,
definitely not. And I mean, like, the rolling resistance is less with tubeless as well. So the bike just rolls a lot easier on tarmac. And it was just super easy to maintain. Just put a bit of sealant in every now and then and keep the tyres pumped up and good to go.
So you mentioned the Carretera Austral. How much of that was a part of your route, and how much of it was just kind of you guys just being totally on the back roads, planning your going up and over these passes?
The Carretera Austral was quite at the end of our trip, really, and we'd been so remote and so off-road through Bolivia and northern Chile and Argentina, and then we sort of dropped down into the Carretera Austral, the beginning of the Carretera Austral, which is on the west coast of Chile. And suddenly we dropped into seeing other cycle tourists, which you just wouldn't see when you were in the depths of the Andes. And it was so bizarre for us, seeing other people and being on these trails where there were cars and things. And for us, it was, I'm afraid to say, it was a bit of a disappointment, I think, because we'd gone from this struggle of being somewhere very remote and having to ration our food to somewhere that was just completely the opposite. There were lots of people, there were lots of cars, and although the scenery was beautiful, it wasn't a super gnarly adventure there for us. And so I think if we were to do it again, we would probably start further up South America, maybe in Colombia or Peru, and sort of just head down to northern Chile and Argentina and sort of skip the Carretera. I mean, it's a great place to go and walk and things like that. But for us, we would just wanted to be in the mountains and right up in there where you could just literally stop your bike at the end of the day and crash out and pitch up your tent and camp. But on the Carretera Austral, it was a little bit harder to do that.
So you guys started with 2 or 3 weeks worth of your itinerary sort of planned out. How easy was that to follow?
Well, there's a severe lack of roads out there, so it was really easy. I mean, there were a few maps that we could find, like paper maps, and we always intended to have paper maps with us as well as our GPS device. But then when we were leaving La Paz, we bumped into another cycle tourer called Campbell, who told us about this app called Map Out. I think it was like £5 from the App Store. And it gives you topographic maps of everywhere in the world with all of the roads and trails on it possible. And you can plot your route and it gives you sort of elevation gains and everything. And for £5, we thought, that's worth a try. It also works offline, so you don't need any signal. And for us, Map Out was how we navigated from then on. We didn't use paper maps at all because both of us had a GPS and a phone with Map Out installed on it. So we would literally plot 2 or 3 weeks worth of the route. We would do the route, get to the next town, then plot the next 2 or 3 weeks on our phones and literally just follow the line on the phone. But there weren't many places you could go wrong because there weren't many roads, to be honest, in the depths of the Andes.
So what do you see out there? I mean, what kind of, are you running into little villages? What kind of people are you running across?
Yeah, so in Bolivia, we started in the youngest region, which is like very tropical. It's dense, humid, rainforesty type region. There's lots of little villages along the way. You bump into people selling cheese at the roadside, and it is really great. I mean, the people were just amazingly friendly, and the food is so varied. You do try some a bit of everything, really. Whatever's going, you try. So yeah, that was the youngest region. Then we went down into the lagunas, which is very sort of volcanic. There's brown, dry dirt everywhere, and of course, your altitude. So it's very, very cold at night. It goes down to like minus 17 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's freezing. I can tell you that it's freezing cold. And then during the day, it goes up to around mid-20s. So it can get quite warm, but bearable. But the sun is so strong when you're at altitude. So you're plastering factor 50 on and still catching the sun. And then, of course, you drop down into Chile and Argentina, which are very much more westernized than Bolivia. You could go, a day or 2 days in Bolivia without seeing anybody, whereas in Chile and Argentina you're pretty much guaranteed to see somebody every day, unless you're really off the beaten track, which is what we try to do.
How were your Spanish skills?
Oh, mine were abysmal. Mine were terrible. But we went there with no skills at all, no Spanish skills between us. But we took like a crash course in La Paz, 3 days of 3 hours of lessons. And Anna really took to it. I mean, she was brilliant. That was one of her fears, I think, beforehand, was speaking in a foreign country. But she actually, was absolutely fantastic with it. She used to spend hours listening to podcasts on Spanish, and she'd try and teach me some bits and pieces. I would try my best, but I have a very strong Cornish accent, which didn't really help, didn't really fit with the Spanish so well. On one occasion, I accidentally asked the pharmacy for a new eye when I wanted eye drops. But much to Anna's hilarity, and also, we learned some very funny things. Like Anna was bitten by a dog, and she went into the hospital. And the word for dog in Spanish is perro, and the word for hill in Spanish is cerro. So she'd accidentally got the two mixed up and ended up saying that she'd been bitten by a hill. So there were a few times where the Spanish wasn't quite as we'd hoped, but we got by, and that's part of the enjoyment of the trip, I think.
Did you guys settle into a routine? And if you did, I'm kind of wondering if you could describe kind of what your routine was for the day.
Yeah, we did. We're both pretty relaxed people, to be honest, and I think that worked really well. We would sort of get up around, or wake up whenever the sun was up, which varied, but normally about 7 o'clock, I would think. We'd sort of shout to each other, morning, from the tent next door, and chat about whatever crazy dreams we'd had that night, because the altitude really does give you some really weird dreams. So that would be the topic of conversation as we were sort of packing up our tents each morning. We'd have breakfast, which varied depending on where we were in the Andes. In Bolivia, we'd have sort of a spoonful or a couple of spoonfuls of porridge with water and some biscuits crumbled on top, just because there was very limited food out there that we could carry with us. So it was a bit random. So we'd cook up some breakfast, pack up our tents. Sometimes I was quicker than Anna at doing that, but most of the time Anna was quicker than me at doing that. But she was very patient. And then we sort of hop on our bikes and start pedaling. And then it varied depending on where we were. When we were off-road and in altitude, we might take rest breaks every hour or 2 hours for 10 or 15 minutes, just by the side of the road. And sort of on roads, you could go a lot longer without taking a break. It really did vary depending on the terrain and the altitude and the weather, how often we took breaks. So we'd go until about 6 o'clock in the evening, keep cycling until about 6 o'clock in the evening, and we'd find somewhere to camp, pitch our tents, cook dinner, and then we might watch a film in one of our tents, because we had sort of films on our iPad that we'd quite often watch, and then sort of go to sleep. I think we'd be asleep by about 9 o'clock each night, and then have like a good solid 10 hours of sleep before the next day. So it was a really nice, simple life. Literally just wake up, pack your tent up, get on your bike with your mate, cycle all day, have a nice meal, and then sleep and repeat. It was so simple. It was fantastic.
Did you guys find yourselves getting invited into other people's homes?
Yes. Yeah, actually we were cycling through a village coming out of the Yungas, actually. And we'd been in the Yungas region for about 9 days, I think. And we were ready to be done at this stage just because it was super hot. We'd been off-road for all that time, and it does take its toll on you when you can only progress sort of 25 miles in an entire day. And we got to this village, and this man came out of this door along the street, and he said to us, "Are you touristy? Are you touristy?" Like this. And Anna said, "Yes, we are touristy. We are tourists." She thought he meant touristy, but what he actually meant was, "Are you thirsty? Are you thirsty?" So he took us into this room. It was on the Day of the Dead. So there was this sort of table full of bread sculptures of their dead relatives. And he invited us in to meet all of his family. He plied us with alcohol because he thought we were thirsty. And bless him. And yeah, we celebrated their relatives who had died with them for a while. And they sent us off, quite bizarrely, with the bread relatives that they had baked for us to eat, which was really, really strange when we were sat there in the evening around the stove having our noodles and dipping, a dead relative's leg into the noodle pot. But it was an incredibly kind gesture from them. But yeah, that wasn't unusual at all. That would happen whenever we saw people. They would come up to us and speak and chat, and it was just great being able to engage with them.
So this bread that was in the shape of these dead relatives, was it just the color of bread, or did they like put icing on it or color it?
So some were coloured, from memory, some were coloured, but the actual bread was coloured, they weren't decorated on top. But yeah, we had just plain looking bread, thankfully. So it did just look like once you pulled it sounds horrific and barbaric. Once you pulled a leg off, it did just look like a little loaf of bread. But yeah, it was they wanted us to eat it, and I thought that was quite special of them to give that to us. So yeah, it was amazing.
So over the 6 months, were you guys camping every night, or did you have some times where you got invited to stay over, or where you stayed in a hostel or something?
We camped for the majority of the 6 months, but every sort of 11 to 13 days, we would get to a town and make sure that we had somewhere like a bed, whether it be in a hostel or an Airbnb or just somewhere cheap that we could stay that would have a bed and a shower. Because after 10 to 13 days of not showering, you're pretty grim. After you're cycling every day We even called ourselves dust truffles because you would get sweaty during the day, and after a lorry has gone by you on a dirt track, they just coat you in this layer of fine dust, and it just sticks to the sweat, so you end up just like a giant truffle. So we were like huge dust truffles, like when we rocked into a town after 10 or 11 days, and we'd just be like needing a shower, and you'd have that first shower, and yet the water was just brown. It was disgusting. So it would take a good 2 or 3 washes to get your hair having the water run clean from your hair. So yeah, after 10 days normally, we would stop in, have a wash, have some good decent food, and some good sleep, and then get on the road again.
That's a nice way to reset.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we really needed that for our sanity, if nothing else.
Did you have any kind of routine for your these stops that you just described, or good for yourself? But what about your bikes? Do you maintain them in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. So we would often try and clean them when we stopped, but there weren't many places to properly wash your bike like you would wash your bike at home. So we had to use wet wipes or towels with water just to try and clean the chains. Most importantly, it was all the running mechanism. We don't really mind if the frame looks dirty and battered. It's making sure the chain is clean and the cassette is clean, giving the cables a good wipe and re-oiling them. So, I mean, there was no set routine. It just, if it looked dirty, we would try and clean it. But to be honest, when we got into town, it was about getting our clothes washed, giving ourselves a wash, and a good decent day off where we've slept well, we've eaten well. And during that time, amazingly, actually, Anna was writing her book, The Pants of Perspective, about her run through New Zealand. So she'd written it, but she was editing it. So she would spend time in the tent each night editing her book. And when we got into town on our days off, she'd be editing the book as well. So she was really putting in the hours there. I was quite inspired by that one. Meanwhile, I was eating all the cake that whatever town there were, all the cake in that town. I'd be finding all the coffee shops. So yeah, we were quite different in that sense.
Faye, what are 3 highlights of the adventure for you?
3 highlights. Oh gosh, there were so many. I think possibly the salt flats in Bolivia were just nothing like I've ever seen ever before. And there were 2 salt flats that we were going to cycle over. There was the Salar de Copiaci, and we had this image of beautifully flat, white, pristine salt that we were just going to cruise over. And on the Salar de Copiaci, we just sank in it about 5 inches. And so we ended up pushing 24 miles across these soft sand salars. And we were like, no, this is not how we envisaged it being. And then the next morning I woke up and I stood on a scorpion, and I was stung by a scorpion. This might sound like my worst memory, but it gets better, I promise. And while I was stood on the scorpion, I was like, I don't know what to do. It was agony. Anna didn't know what to do either. Stupidly, none of us had known there were scorpions in Bolivia, which is something we both regret. But luckily, I'd seen that episode of Friends, when Monica gets stung by a jellyfish, and Joey offers to wee on it. So I was like, what do we do? Do I wee on it, or do I try and suck the sting out? There's all these questions that you ask yourself. What do you do when you're in the middle of Bolivia and you've got nothing to help with the scorpion sting? But thankfully, I didn't wee on it. Anna resorted to Dr. Google. We had some 3G signal, and she was researching. She was like, "Oh my god!" And I'm like, "Oh my god, what?" And she was like, "I've just lost 3G signal." I was like, "That's not. Oh my god! Oh my god! It's gonna kill you!" That's But anyway, she found out the scorpion wasn't deadly, and now I get to tell the tale that I've been stung by a scorpion, and that's wicked, because you don't get scorpions in England at all. So the next day after I'd been stung by a scorpion, we managed to get on the largest salt flat in the world, which is the Salar de Uyuni, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's vast. I think it's 11,000 square kilometers. It's just huge, and we decided we were going to cycle across it. And it was just like you see in the pictures. It's pristine, flat, salty goodness. There was just salt hexagon patterns the whole way across. And we had so much fun. After a while, we were like, what could we do on these salt flats? And we played hopscotch, which goes on a long, long time. we played Can You Fill a Salt Hexagon with Your Own Wee? Because that was a great game. Anna and I had a lot of fun with that one. So you would not go for a wee for as long as possible and then try and fill one of the little salt hexagons with your wee. This is what happens when you leave two girls alone in the Andes for 6 months. And then it got to the second day of cycling across, and Anna turned to me, and before this trip she said to me, Faye, you know we're going to get naked on the salt flats, don't you? And I was like, no, I'm not going to. You can get naked. I'm not getting naked, because I barely get naked to get in the shower, to be honest. I'm that much of a prude. But it was the second day. I'd already gone for a wee in front of Anna countless times, and she'd done the same to me. And she turned to me and said, Faye, it's time. It's time to get naked. And she starts taking off her clothes, and I thought, you know what? It is time. Let's get naked. And so I begin taking off my clothes, and we get on our bikes, and we are cycling around the salt flats naked with not a soul in sight. And at first, I'm sort of covering up my boobs and my private parts, cycling around. And then after a while, we're doing naked flyby high fives with each other, just whooping with joy and beaming ear to ear at the ridiculousness of the situation that we were in. And it was just such a great memory, not because we were naked, but just because we were doing something ridiculous in the most bizarre place in the world with one of my best mates. And for me, that was just an absolute highlight of the trip.
I don't know what to say.
I left you speechless there. Sorry. Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Well, do you have?
You're gonna have to edit that out.
No, I can't. I can't edit that out. That's too good. I have to leave that in there.
Oh, okay, that's good. As long as it's not too risque.
I don't think it's gonna make me have to tag this as explicit. I don't think so.
Oh, good stuff.
So was there another good memory that you have?
Yeah. So when we were crossing from, I think it was Argentina into Chile, there was a route called Route 13 that we'd been warned not to use because it was just so rocky and cars couldn't get over it anymore, and it had been closed really for quite a while. But the other option was this really busy road that just looked horrendous and wasn't in the nature of the trip at all. And so we decided to go for this Route 13 trip. We stocked up on supplies. We headed off, and we were heading out of, I can't remember where it was, Mendoza. It was Mendoza in Argentina. And on the way out, this guy on a scooter stopped and was like, you can't go that way. And we're like, okay. He was saying peligro, which is sort of danger and, warning. And we thought he just thinks we're two girls and we haven't cycled through the Andes and that sort of thing, which was quite arrogant of us, I think, because what he was actually trying to tell us was that the region of Mendoza that we were trying to cycle through to get to Route 13 was dangerous because there was gun crime and things in that area. So we sort of politely thanked the guy and said, "Thank you, we'll continue." And so we continued on to go through Mendoza to get to this Route 13. And the guy on the moped appeared again, this time looking more serious. And he said to us, no, you cannot go through here. Like, he wouldn't let us go through. Next thing, this police car turned up and a lady got out. She was like, no, you can't go through. And that's when we realized that actually the route to get to Route 13 was very dangerous. And so the police car escorted us off. We thanked the moped driver profusely because, we did appreciate the fact that he was trying to look after us. And so the police driver took us back to the police station and found us a route to get to Route 13. So just getting to Route 13 alone was a bit of an adventure for us, and the closest we came to any danger in the entire trip. We were sort of grateful that we were able to do what we wanted to do, and really we were shown a side of humanity that it was just lovely to have somebody looking out for you in a foreign country. So we got to Route 13, and it was just as we'd heard. It was super gnarly. There were like boulders and rivers going down the road. It's not like a tarmac road. It's completely off-road. And we sort of camped up under this tree. And the next morning when we woke up, Anna had a flat tyre. So she fixed the tyre and we set off. And we had 2,500 metres to climb that day to get to the top of the mountain pass that we wanted to get to. And that is just huge. That's a big old mountain to climb. But we set off, I think it was only about 22 miles, so 2,500 meters in 22 miles, which we thought in a day was achievable. But during that day, we had 3 punctures. That was the day of the 3 punctures. And the temperatures got to around 38 degrees. So it was pretty hot, though 38 degrees Celsius. It was pretty hot. And we had to push a lot of the way because it was so steep. Our bikes would just wheel spin, or the front end would sort of lift up as we were trying to sort of pedal up these hills. So by the end of the day, we spent 13 hours trying to get to the top of this mountain pass. And the very top of this mountain pass was so steep that both Anna and I had to push one another's bikes up, sort of 2 of us pushing one bike to get to the top. And when we got to the top, above us were 2 Andean condors circling literally about 15 feet above our head. And it was just the sun was setting. We saw our first proper jagged snow-capped mountains, because before that you see mountains, but they didn't have a lot of snow on. It was just the most amazing sight. And I think after 12 or 13 hours of what we'd gone through with the punctures, the pushing, the temperature, to get to the top, to see that view, and to have 2 Andean condors above you, circling just a few feet above your head, it was just the best feeling ever. And I was just stood with my mate Anna on the top, enjoying it and soaking it all up. And we just thought, this is what it's all about right here. And then we just got on our bikes and pedaled down the hill for a bit, pitched up our tents and enjoyed the sunset. And it was amazing. And for me, it's always the memories that have been a struggle to make that I remember. So the difficult days are the days that I remember and look back on fondly now, funnily enough. Not so much at the time, but now I look back, I'm really happy we had those hard days. So yeah, that was a real highlight for me.
Let's contrast those highlights, which were, as you say, were very challenging at some points. What were some of the things that you would call the low points of the trip?
Funnily enough, it'd probably be Christmas Day, when we were in Chile, and it got extremely, extremely hot. It was 43 degrees Celsius, and our water and our water bottles were just superheated. There was nowhere where we could get cool water. We were literally in the middle of a national park, and there was no running streams or rivers or anything. And so we had the water that we had, and when you're trying to cool down in that temperature, when you've only got hot water to drink, it's just horrendous. It's absolutely hideous. And we had to keep cycling to get to a campsite, because you can't, in this one national park, it was the only area where we found we weren't legally allowed to camp. And so we had to keep going. I think it was 50 miles through this boiling hot sandy terrain to get to this campsite that we could legally camp in. And when we got there, Anna was worse for wear. She was slurring her words. She wasn't making any sense. She had heat stroke, and she felt sick, and it was horrible. And that's the sort of fun that, even when I look back on it now, it wasn't enjoyable, because seeing your friend suffer whilst you're suffering yourself, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just a horrible situation. And of course, it was Christmas Day. We were away from our family. It could have been a lot worse, but it was not a highlight of the trip at all. It was quite a low point. And I think, although there's a certain element of me that enjoys the suffering, there was definitely a point in Bolivia where I hit rock bottom, and Anna a little bit later hit rock bottom, and that was because we were basically effectively starving in the Bolivian Lagunas region. We had a certain amount of food, and you would get to what looks like a town on the map, and there might be just sort of one house or a couple of houses in the little village. I remember we got to this little village, and there was no obvious shop, but we saw a lady, and she said, "Yes, come to the shop, come to the shop." She walks us through her front yard, I guess, and there's a man sitting in front of a fire when it's got this pot of bubbling stuff on it, and she says, come follow me, all in Spanish. She takes us into a house, into her bedroom, and points to a cupboard on the wall and says, "This is the shop." And the shop, which was the cupboard on the wall, consisted of 3 packs of crackers, some chewing gum, and some wafers. And that had to last us 3 days. You could probably get by on that here, when you're at sea level. and when you're not cycling sort of 40 miles a day. But when you're at altitude, you're burning around 4,000 calories a day. And so we were just like, oh my goodness, we've got 3 days to survive on this. The first day it was okay. The second day it just got harder. And by the third day, we were both absolutely exhausted. We had no energy in our bodies, and a stonking headwind picked up. And I remember just pushing my bike because we couldn't cycle into the wind anymore. We were just too exhausted. Looking across at Anna. Anna had tears in her eyes. I was crying as well. And we were just in our own zone, just quietly pushing on, but, you know, just being at that point of like, what on earth are we doing? But eventually we stumbled back upon the tourist trail and into this little hut where there were people who had stopped to go and, you know, view the lagunas. And they looked at us and they were like, what the hell happened to you guys? Because we were like pale, like tears with dust stuck to our tears running down our faces, filthy, stinking. They were like, where have you been? And we're like, please say you have some food. And they did. And bless them, they sort of raided the supplies and they gave us enough food to sort of get through to the Chilean side, into San Pedro de Atacama. But oh my goodness, that was just the hardest. That was the hardest point, I think, the starvation side of things. And the food in Bolivia in particular was basically sugary snacks. So lots of biscuits. They didn't have things like rice and pasta that we could put in our packs. So we survived basically on biscuits and noodles. And if you were lucky, you'd be able to get some cheese and possibly a tomato every now and then. It'd be a total jackpot if we had all three, like noodles, cheese and a tomato. That would be sort of, you know, fine dining in the evening. So yeah, that was a challenge. That was a real challenge.
Wow, that's quite an adventure there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool though, isn't it? It's like now you look back on it, you're like, wow, that was wicked.
Were you,
even though it was a low point. But
were you scared during that time, or did you think, no, you know, we'll eventually, you know, get some food in time?
Do you know what? I don't really know. I think we just had the mindset of, well, we've got to get on with this because we don't have a choice. And I think we knew we were only sort of 10 miles away at our lowest point. We were only 10 miles away from getting back on the main Lagunas road. So we just thought, 10 more miles, we can make it, 10 more miles. And although those 10 miles took us hours and hours, I don't think we were really scared at that point. It was just a feeling of, can we go on? But yeah, luckily we had each other, I think, because if I was alone, I would have been terrified. I would have been terrified.
So let me rewind to the heat stroke thing. What did you guys do in that situation?
We stopped under trees as much as we could for shade. We used some of the water to put on our skin because we knew that even though it was warm, well, hot at times, that it would cool us sort of semi-effectively. But we just had to keep going to that campsite, and we used up more water than we should have done, but in the knowledge that we would get to a campsite and there should be water there. And there was, thankfully. It was quite a well-established campsite. So yeah, we pretty much used our entire water supply, just trying to cool ourselves down a lot of the time. I soaked my t-shirt in water to try and cool my body down, poured it over my helmet, and just kept trying to drink, even though it was disgusting drinking hot water. But yeah, once we got to the campsite, there was plenty of water there, so we restocked our supplies. But Christmas dinner was was not a very enjoyable affair. We sort of attempted to cook our pasta. We didn't have any energy for dessert, so we sort of bunked down in our tents and called it a day. But Boxing Day was a much better affair, thankfully.
So thankfully, during that episode of running low on food, you were not alone. But now going through that, would you want to ever do something like this by yourself?
I think doing an adventure by yourself is really important. And that's the main reason why I did the New Zealand cycle by myself. Because I wanted to know that I could cope and I could manage on my own, and I could meet people and I could make friends on my own and not rely on other people to sort of carry me along. And I learned so much about my capabilities and how I could get on with other people and ways to interact with other people by myself. And I think it's so important, if you do get the chance to do an adventure by yourself, to just do it, because you do learn a massive amount. But for this trip, I absolutely have no doubt in my mind that it was the best decision to say yes and to go with Anna, because it's not something I would have done alone. And probably now looking back on it, it's not something I would do alone if I was to do it again. Part of the best thing about that adventure was the friendship and the things that we went through together and the laughs that we shared. We laughed pretty much every single day at something, mostly at one another, to be honest. But yeah, definitely the friendship was, one of the absolute highlights for me coming out of it, and the way that the memories we've shared, and we meet up now and chat about it. And there's things that Anna remembers that I had, completely forgotten. And yeah, so for sure, I would definitely have no regrets in doing it again with Anna, or doing it again with, going with somebody. I would say is definitely something to do. That was rubbish, by the way, that answer. But yeah, for me, yeah, the Andes for sure was something to do with somebody.
What were you most worried about before you started, and did those worries turn out to be ultimately something you needed to be worried about?
I think I'd been influenced by the news and, the whole thing that surrounds South America, being like drug cartels and gangs and, that sort of information that, you see in the media. I think my parents were even more worried. They were super worried about that sort of thing. And I just thought, well, I've got a friend with me. I'll have a penknife, to try and defend myself if anything happens. But actually, I think that was my biggest worry. And camping as well, and being out there camping, thinking we'd get attacked in the night or something like that. That was my biggest fear, I think. And actually, the complete opposite happened. There was no evidence of gangs. There was, apart from that one area in Mendoza that was a bit sketchy, we had no negative experiences with people in 5,500 miles in 6 months. And I think that speaks volumes. We only see the bad bits that happen in the world on the news. You never hear, the good news stories that happen every single day in the world, but you just don't see it very often. And I was annoyed at myself that I'd let myself believe that there was that sort of thing going on everywhere in South America. But actually, it was just hugely welcoming. The people were incredible, very hospitable and friendly. And I'm so glad that, I'm able to say that and say that, it is a very welcoming, friendly continent. Sorry. Yeah, it's just fantastic.
What about the adventure are you most proud of?
I think the way that Anna and I managed our relationship, I think that was also one of the hardest things for me, because Anna's a very open person. She says what she's thinking. She wears her heart on her sleeve, which is absolutely lovely. But I'm not. I try and be open, but I don't want to offend people. I don't want to upset the balance. But sometimes I think Anna said to me, if you respect a relationship, you've got to say when you're feeling upset or something's bothered you. And that was a revelation for me, I think, because before I'd only ever been like, oh, it's annoyed me, but I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to just like ruin the relationship. But actually, all it does is that little annoyance eats away at you, and then something else will happen, and that turns into a bigger annoyance. And then before you know it, you have this resentment building up, and it's not healthy. And for Anna to show me that, I could say, that really annoyed me, or I didn't think you were, I don't know, being very considerate or something. Not that Anna was ever inconsiderate, but you know what I mean? It was, I think for her to show me that it was okay to tell somebody if you're annoyed with them, or explain why something happened wasn't quite right, and there still be a friendship. I think it shows that there's respect when you're able to deal with that relationship like in that way. And that took time. I mean, it took time for both of us to be able to say to one another, that really annoyed me, or I was upset when you did this. But I think we've both come out of it stronger in that sense, in that we can feel able to say that to one another. And the next day, it's absolutely fine between us. We were fine. And I mean, we didn't fall out as well. I think we probably had we worked out 3.5 arguments in the entire trip. So that's not too bad. And they weren't on full-on arguments. They were sort of discussions around ways that different things had happened. But absolutely, I think the way that we manage the relationship is something I'm really proud of. So yeah, for sure. As well as, all the stats and figures, which were very cool. I think the relationship itself is something I'm very proud of.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know for me, at least with guys, maybe it's different with women. I don't want to let them know what the issue is, because then they might turn around and just use that on purpose to annoy you even more.
Yes, yeah, I know, but it's difficult though. I think if you know somebody is innately good, I think that was a good thing. Like, I know that Anna, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. I know that Anna she at her core are really good values. She's kind, she's selfless, she's caring. And if those core values are there, there's going to be a sense of trust in that. If I tell you something like, you've annoyed me because of this, they're not then going to use it against you in the future. And you've just got to trust that, that's going to happen. And if they don't, and they do use it against you in the future, well, I'm not sure I would want that relationship anyway.
Exactly. You kind of hit it on the head right there. They've got to be good at the core in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you were to do this all over again, what's something that you would do differently?
I think start from Colombia at the top of South America, and then go down through Bolivia and to the sort of northern Chile and Argentina. So if we had the 6 months, I think we would do that portion of the Andes rather than the middle and lower half, just because I think it's slightly more remote. So in the southern Chile and Argentina, it's quite westernized. There's shops, there's cash machines. You can get water quite easily. And although that's great, for us, we wanted gnarliness and off-road and in the wilderness. And I think if we started in northern South America, so Colombia and Peru, then that would be what we were looking for. So, I think if we were to do it again, just start slightly higher up.
Faye, what's on the horizon for you?
Well, at the minute, I've just qualified as an emergency care assistant for the Southwest Ambulance Service in the UK. So I will be driving ambulances, taking observation on patients, and assisting the paramedic in some procedures. So I've just I just completed my training for that at the minute. So a new career, which I'm really excited about, with hopefully in the future becoming a paramedic. And in terms of adventure, there's some things I'd love to do. There's some of the 7 summits that I'm desperate to do. So we cycled past Aconcagua in Argentina. And as soon as I saw it, I knew I had to get up there at some point in my life. So that's definitely on the list to do. I'd love to do something polar as well, whether that's cycle, I don't know, to the South Pole or something like that, or pull a sled somewhere. I don't know, but I'd love to do something polar. So yeah, I mean, there's a million things I'd love to do, but it's, fitting it in and making it work around my new goal, which is to become a paramedic. But I'm sure there will be some pretty cool adventures along the way.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more?
Facebook and Twitter are a good one, because I'm normally on there updating it. So yeah, I'm Faye Shepherd Hike Bike Life on Facebook, and at Faye_Shepherd on Twitter. Or you can visit my website.
FayeShepherd.wordpress.com.
That's the one, yeah, thank you.
That's FayeShepherd.
That's the one, yep.
All right, Faye Shepherd, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and telling some crazy stories about you and Anna's adventure. And good luck to you on your career change, because that sounds like quite a scary adventure in and of itself.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and ready to go out in the big bad world and try and help some people now. So I'm very much looking forward to that. So
okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for listening. If you want to support the show, here are a few simple ways. 1, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast. 2, you can like the show on Facebook or follow along on Twitter at The Pursuit Zone. 3, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or Spotify. This episode was recorded on May 5th, 2018. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.